Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the ADHD Toolbox. And today we're going to talk about something that's very important. I think it's very important because it's relating to health. And, anytime we run across these situations where we can eliminate a problem that may not be ADHD that's causing all the havoc with your children or even with yourself, it's such a great thing to do. And today we're going to talk about inflammation. Now, inflammation is in ADHD can cause problems, but inflammation in all sorts of areas can cause problems. So this will be relevant to just about everyone listening. And I'm super happy we have Carla Atherton here to talk about this. Carla, welcome to our program.
Thank you so much for having me, Bob. It's an honor.
Well, Carla's in the Pacific Northwest. She lives out, is that right? Up by Montana, Canada area?
Well, in Canada, yeah, so I'm not quite Pacific, but I would say sort of more central.
Got it. Got it. And so we
Yeah.
may have some video issues, but you'll be able to hear just fine. Carla is the director of the Healthy Family Formula, a host of the Children's Summit, the family health and nutritional coach. She's also a writer, editor, researcher, curriculum developer, publisher, workshop leader, yoga instructor, and health revolutionary, as well as a children's health advocate. So you do a ton of stuff here. How did you wind up getting involved working with ADHD?
Well, it kind of stemmed from, I guess, always being interested in health and not really knowing anything, thinking I did. And then, coming across health challenges in our own family because we were pretty much, kind of tickety-boo moving along. Everybody seemed really good, healthy, bright, energetic. I was a homeschooling mom, doing a lot of education, starting businesses, all this stuff. But then my daughter, when we moved out to an acreage, that's where I am. That's why we have some connectivity issues because the bandwidth is not very good and we don't have very good high speed out here. So I apologize for that. But we moved out here, seemed like, living the dream. And then I was having a few health problems, but not so bad, went gluten-free, stuff like that. But my daughter ended up getting diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, just, and it's such a quick onset. There's nothing gradual about it. So it really rocked us, and my own insatiable, curiosity led me to right down the path of, naturopathy, which I was already interested in, but also functional medicine, and also, holistic methods, and learning about root causes because I wanted to know what happened and why. And so through that journey, I became really involved with children's health. So that became my niche per se in family health. And then I started working with people like the Documenting Hope Project and Epidemic Answers and Fearless Parent. And they were doing things that I never really knew about. And it was connecting all of these different childhood conditions. So one of those is ADHD. Another one is autism and, autoimmunity in general, not just type 1 diabetes, MS, and things like, sensory processing or learning disabilities. Things like that all have a root cause, and all of these things have sort of similar root causes. And of course, as we know, any illness really stems from this inflammatory state that the body is in. So when you approached me to be on this in this series, I was really excited to talk about inflammation and how that affects children who exhibit reactions or symptoms that we are terming or categorizing as ADHD.
Yeah, it's and I think of inflammation as swelling. So we're going to dig into that. What is inflammation really? And when you think about inflammation and the brain and how that could be causing inflammation, and we all know that when inflammation goes away, so many things can start to heal up and you start to feel better. And so, when I was thinking, and in fact, in doing all these interviews on ADHD, never once have I thought of an inflamed brain. And so I'll bet it's out of the purview of a lot of our viewers here too. So let's dig in. Let's talk about that. So what is inflammation, and how does inflammation create symptoms of ADHD within children and or adults?
Okay. So, well, yeah, and the way most of the time we understand it is like inflammation happens when, you see the red welt when you whack your arm or something like that, or you get, it's an injury, right? That causes this whole cascade of, reactions within the body and the immune system, and it's trying to do its job to fix everything up, right? So it's got the emergency workers and they're all there, that's a bunch of stuff going on. It's like, alarm bells going off. And so the cells become inflamed, and we need some kind of, and tissues become inflamed. And so we need some kind of inflammation. Like, that's not always bad, right? Like, that's that, that it's doing its job. Like, you're going to get a welt when you have an injury. That's going to happen. But there's other things that cause inflammation. And when that inflammation becomes chronic, that becomes a real problem, because your body's always in a hyper-reactive, responsive state. And there's not really any healing that happens at that point, because it's constantly, constant repair and constant damage being happening, right? Because so we can have, trauma or injury causing inflammation, right? An infection can create inflammation within the body. EMF exposure, even, we'll be talking about that in a little bit more in a bit, because I really can't leave that alone, because it's a huge source of inflammation. Antigens, that are introduced into the body through what we breathe, what we eat. So food reactivity can cause inflammation in the whole body as well as in the brain. And so we don't want this chronic state of inflammation, because that's when we get, symptoms and chronic disease. And so, and ADHD, I don't consider it a disease, but I do consider it a chronic state of being, right? Like, it's something that is, there's something going on within the body that's creating this set of symptoms that is just continual and ongoing. I'd like to talk about root causes of that in a little bit too, when we get the chance. But this is really what's going on in the body. So it's supposed to be temporary. It's not supposed to be ongoing. And these arms of the immune system are not supposed to be reacting all the time, 24 hours a day. They're just our immune defenses. But we don't want to be in defense mode all the time. It's almost like you're, waiting for an army to come, and you're just like jacked up all the time, and you become exhausted, right? That's what happens to the body. And so our children's brains can become inflamed in this way, like I said, creating ADHD, like symptoms of ADHD, autism, sensory processing disorders, like things like PANDAS, which is actually escalated into an autoimmune reactivity in the brain. Mental health problems, mood disorders such as depression, anxiety, the list goes on and on.
Got it. So inflammation, how does it create symptoms for children of ADHD? So if their brain is inflamed, what happens there?
What do you mean? Like, you mean like what's biochemically happening there? Or
so you say that the brain gets inflamed. Does it kind of just push on the other parts of the brain and less blood flow, and so they're not able to use?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. There could be many different things that are happening. Like, whenever I think of the brain and something's not quite right going on in there, I think of several different things. So one of those things would be toxicity. So sometimes there's like a deficiency or toxicity, right? So there's certain things that aren't getting into the brain, or certain, like, let's say the gut, the GI is actually inflamed, and then we're not actually processing and assimilating all of what we're eating, right? Let's say, then they're not getting the nutrients to the brain that are actually anti-inflammatory, that are actually, nurturing the brain, helping the brain develop and grow, work properly, right? Like it's not getting the fuel. And then there's a situation of toxicity where, you can have, receptor sites being taken up by heavy metals, for instance, right? And so the actual nutrients aren't getting in, or the neurochemicals aren't getting in to lock into those receptor sites where they're supposed to. And that can create an inflammatory state as well. And also all of those toxins that can be kind of floating around and not draining out of the brain through the lymphatic system if you're not getting enough sleep, let's say, that happens at night, or you're not producing enough melatonin to detoxify, that can create an inflammatory state, as well as endocrine disruption. So that's all our hormones. It's like, the brains then there are hormones that are created in the endocrine, the brain endocrine. And so those aren't being, told to produce in the right amounts. And so those messengers aren't happening. And so we're not producing enough thyroid hormone, or the cortisol is off. All of those things can kind of cascade and create more inflammation in the brain and also in the rest of the body. So it's the whole thing, Bob, like where it's like an entire orchestra. And again, I was mentioning neurochemicals too, that, can be very, like some neurochemicals are actually excitotoxic. So as we know, with excitotoxicity, and in the brain in particular, the neurons actually get so excited by things like excess glutamate, for instance, that will actually kill. The brain cells will get so excited they overreact, and then they die. So so high glutamate and things like eating MSG, things like and yeast, what do you call it, hydrolyzed products like hydrolyzed yeast, those things are excitotoxic, create all massive inflammation in the brain, and you get those kiddos like off the rails. So those are sort of some of the biochemical things that are going on in the brain that can create this inflamed state. And then we can have autoimmunity too, which is highly inflammatory. And so those things can happen, but actually from any of the things that I mentioned. But there can be an autoimmune or response of the body, so that the body is actually attacking its own cells. And that's highly inflammatory too, and actually neurodegenerative. So I hope that helps a little bit to clarify.
Yeah. I know from, being kind of a brain development expert, is that, your brain is very sensitive. If it's not hydrated,
Yeah.
you won't think as well. If it doesn't get the blood flow, you don't think as well. And there's
Yes.
also ways to optimize it too, where you might be right or left dominant, and you can do exercise that you can use your whole brain. So inflammation has to cause havoc in the brain. And then you have the gut, where a lot of people don't realize, but the gut is where a lot of brain chemicals are stored, neurochemicals. So you got serotonin,
Yeah.
and dopamine, things like that. And so if the gut's off, you're going to have problems, and that's going to cause inflammation in other areas, maybe your brain as well. So you can have, this is a very important ecosystem, if you will, between the gut and the brain and inflammation. And that kind of leads us to our next question, because there must be a lifestyle that causes the inflammation, right? Like lifestyles of Cheetos and hot dogs or something like that, that's not good for you, that is not good for you, but you do it anyway because it's easy, fast food or whatever. Can you describe what an inflammatory lifestyle might look like, so people understand that, yeah, that's me, I need to change, and then we'll talk about how to change. So what does an inflammatory lifestyle look like?
Yeah, and you know what? I just want to recap real quick, because I think you gave a really, really good rundown of a couple of things that I didn't actually mention. So I talked about toxicity, deficiency, and also as well as creating an inflammation in general. And
Sure.
so, and then you talked about blood flow to the brain, huge, and also blood sugar. So we're going to get to that when we talk about inflammatory lifestyle, because blood sugar regulation is huge. Actually, what's really interesting is that they're starting to call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. So that's how closely related blood sugar, elevated blood sugar is related to brain health and neurodegeneration, because of this toxic levels of sugar that are floating around in the bloodstream and including up into the brain. So, and creating plaques in there as well. So that's another issue with heart disease, as well as high sugar diets. Not high fat, high sugar, okay? But we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But, okay, so an inflammatory lifestyle. So inflammatory lifestyle would involve, like you said, eating poor food, poor diet. And actually what we call that is an inflammatory diet. So you can actually even do a Google search and say, okay, what are inflammatory foods and what are not anti-inflammatory foods, and really get a good handle on, which ones create inflammation and which ones don't. But really, like, rules of thumb would be, foods that are, really like bad oils, for instance. Like we want a diet that's really got nice, rich, healthy oils, because our brains, our children's brains and our adult brains, like children need it for development, adults need, this good fats for maintaining good brain health. So we don't want to be eating all those bad oils, like you're saying, Cheetos, like things that are fried, like McDonald's, and those oils that we're getting like in copious amounts actually in the SAD diet, the standard American diet, which is called the acronym is SAD diet. So it's a little sad. So so inflammatory foods and things that are just not healthy for you, junk food, packaged foods in bag boxes and cans, chemicals, preservatives. you know, things that are denatured, you know, irradiated, microwaved, you know, cooked, denatured when they're cooked, you know, so like I said, fried, but also like barbecued actually isn't really that good for you. It's quite inflammatory, and it makes the food carcinogenic as well. So we want to be cleaning up those diets for sure. And I never, ever, I can work with someone who's got the most difficult case, but I never start with the complicated. I start with the food, because that is actually the easiest thing, not easiest, actually really hard for people, but it's the one they have the most control over. They don't need a prescription. They don't need to go buy a bunch of different, you know, magic pills. You know, they just need to eat better and make different choices. So that's one thing. That's part of the lifestyle that we lead that's inflammatory and very damaging to the brain. High blood sugar, like I was saying, is extremely toxic to the brain. And we want to protect those brains, and that this has a very big impact on kids who have ADHD, for sure. I mean, some people actually, I've known actually several families who have just simply taken their children off of red food dye and sugar, and their kids actually started getting invited to birthday parties again, and they were easy to be around, and they realized they were reacting. So an inflammatory state as well isn't just like inflammation, but it's a state of inflammation where it's reactive, right? So these kids were actually reacting to the sugar. They were reacting to the high blood sugar. They were reacting to the foods that they were eating. So another thing is exposing ourselves to inflammatory toxicants. I mentioned those in passing. So some of those things might be chemical assaults, heavy metals, you know, found in like amalgam fillings, and there are many different sources that, you know, heavy metals can come into the body. That's huge when we're talking about brain, you know, degeneration or, you know, difficulty in brain development, and also interruption and all these different biochemical things that we were talking about, processes earlier on. Infection actually is another thing that we can be, you know, have on our radar too as being inflammatory. And when we have a poor immune system, you know, we're kind of open season. And if we have a gut, like you were saying, the gut is not balanced, opportunistic infection moves in. And so that creates all kinds of inflammation as well. And if we have any sort of breach in the blood-brain barrier, those infections can kind of, you know, hitch a ride up into the brain. And that's what creates something called like PANDAS or PANS, which is a neuroautoimmune condition. And again, like, you know, ADHD, I've seen lots of kiddos who have parasites that are just kind of wigging out and, you know, having these symptoms. And there's like a whole, like, a different combination for every single kiddo. And so this is why we get to root cause. And we'll talk about that when we talk about solutions. Another thing is rest and sleep and, you know, repair. So if our kids aren't sleeping and resting, that's highly inflammatory to their brains. And they will not do well in school. They will not focus. They will not concentrate. They will have all kinds of labels. And sometimes just, you know, correcting that, that circadian rhythm makes all the difference. And you know, if you look at, you know, studies and you talk to clients who have, you know, really big health issues, you know, sometimes those people are shift workers and they never sleep at a normal time of day. And they're always run down, feeling horrible, don't detoxify well, don't produce melatonin, you know, during the night, or like drain through the lymphatic system of the brain. So that can create a lot of problems as well. So again, not enough sleep or rest or repair time is inflammatory. And then another one, like I was saying, was food and food reactivity. But I just like, it's not just the food we eat and having a healthy diet generally, but also ignoring things like foods that, you know, each individual might be allergic to, but not the general population, right? So it might be something like, you know, some people are reactive to rice, or they can't eat lentils, or, you know, soy products, or eggs, or dairy, you know, those kinds of foods. Wheat is huge. Right? Huge. Wheat is huge. Wheat in the brain. I'm thinking if you've got anything going on with the brain, I'm getting off of gluten now. That's one of those top things that I'm recommending that people do. And it's one of the ones that actually I've seen kids that, you know, parents just want to give them away, you know, little 3-year-olds that are just off the rails, can't eat, like they send them to school because they don't know what else to do with them. And, you know, simply taking them off of reactive foods has changed that child's life. So that's one thing I'm looking at for sure. And EMF exposure. Now, can I just go on a little teeny little tangent on EMF? Yeah, please.
So
okay.
EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, right?
Electromagnetic
caused by cell phones and electric, wires that are, flying through our neighborhoods and our devices and all sorts of stuff like that. Just so our audience can hear about what we're talking about.
Yeah.
EMS.
Yes.
Okay,
yes, and we're surrounded by them now, right, Bob? Like we're using them right now so that we can actually communicate.
Wi-Fi.
I'm not going to, we are. I actually don't have Wi-Fi. No. I actually plug my stuff in. I don't have Wi-Fi. I will not have Wi-Fi in my house, but that's because I've done, there's a lot of stuff that I've, researched about this, but, and have experience in myself, right? Like in my own life, in my own home. So, so Wi-Fi, particularly Wi-Fi, wireless technology and 5G, cell phones, those are the things that are the most damaging. You do have, we have wires in the wall. So if you're standing a little bit closer to a plug-in, you'll have some sort of electromagnetic field, because all of this stuff is giving off this energy. We just can't see it. Like it does, because how else does it work? Like it's working. We just can't actually see it. Wi-Fi, we're receiving those messages. That energy is coming from one thing to the next, but we just can't see it. So what it does is cause global inflammation in the body and all the cells in the body. So, and it just does all the time. And it's just, there are 10,000, published articles in PubMed about this. This is not anything that's, kind of woo-woo or like a theory. This is what's actually happening. And we can actually measure that inflammation. We can actually see it happen. It's more detrimental to children because children's skulls are, thinner, although that's not a barrier whatsoever. It doesn't really protect us much at all. And there's a higher water content. And so as we all know, throw a toaster in the water, what's going to happen? The current will travel, right? The water actually acts as a conduit, right? So, we really have to pay attention to that. How does our Wi-Fi on all day? Do our kids wear those wireless headsets? Are they, gaming quite a bit with wireless handheld things? Do they use cell phones? Do they play with them? Or, literally, I have seen, again, same thing with the food, lives turn around just by not allowing that child to play on your cell phone anymore. And there are two things going on with that, Bob. There is the inflammation that happens because of the actual physiological effects that the Wi-Fi radiation is having on that child's body and brain. And it's also the addictive aspect of it, right? Where, there's this dopamine hit of everything that happens on that device. And so that, that even keel is like this. And then they actually enter a reactive state of stress, hyperstress, chronic hyperstress. And then you have this problem, this chicken and egg, this self-perpetuating cycle where the child is given a device because it calms them. And then, but at the same time, it's perpetuating the problem and maybe even is one of the major causes of that child's actual problem in the first place. So I'm really on the EMFs. And so if you've got a kiddo that has ADHD symptoms and you want to, really explore all the ways that you can say, wake up the next day, have a good meal, a good breakfast, low sugar, good fats, adequate protein, and see how they do that day. And just keep doing that for a few days, you might see a lot of stuff unravel and all of that reactivity settle down and calm down. So again, so we'll go into some ways that we can do that with the solutions. And there's one other thing. I wanted to say that all these things can create not only neuroinflammation, but like we were saying, unhealthy, imbalanced microbiome, mitochondrial dysfunction, and the mitochondria, produce the ATP of the cell. So that's the energy center of the cell, right? We need energy in every single cell to function. Right. Endocrine disruption, right? Neurochemical imbalance, and a state of hyper stress, right? So hyper stress, this is also inflammatory. Yeah.
So, that's a ton of information. I'm sure if you're watching this, you're probably going to have to go back and rewind this and listen to it again, because that's a giant download of information. But the bottom line is, no, that's okay, because we need to hear this stuff. But the bottom line is that there are lots of things that could be causing inflammation. We've got not only the EMFs, but we got the diet, and we got all sorts of things that are in our environment. And even when
Yeah.
you don't use them, you're not using your Wi-Fi, you're not using your cell phone, you're still getting the EMFs, and that's kind of a big, a big deal as well. So,
Yeah.
so now that we know there's this problem, what are some practical solutions that we can help to reduce the inflammatory state and reverse some of these ADHD symptoms?
Okay, so well, let's go through like the ones that I was just mentioning. So, of course, lifestyle, right? So get those kids on a good sleep cycle, and so that means doing things like good sleep hygiene. You don't have any electronics in the bedroom. That's one thing I just think is like a no-brainer. Just no electronics in the bedroom.
Got it.
Off electronics for at least an hour or two before bed. Two is better. Winding down, turning down the lights at night. I mean, really, if our bodies think that the sun is up and there's a whole bunch of lights on blazing until midnight, you're not gonna go into that circadian rhythm that we need for rest and repair and detoxification, because detoxification is a very huge issue in our modern world. We need to continually be doing that, otherwise it builds up and things start to fall apart and not work properly. The communication is disrupted within the body.
Got it.
So lifestyle is huge. Lifestyle is huge. Sleep, exercise, right? Getting lots of exercise, channeling, energy, rather than kind of like sitting around playing video games. That's another issue with, tech overuse is, that sitting around and lack of exercise, and oxygenation, like you said, in the brain is really important. So how better to oxygenate the brain than to exercise? That's one really great way to do that. And then, things like creativity, joy, and play, those things are really, they're non-inflammatory, they're relaxing, they're actually causing a state of rest and digest rather than, and, innovation and being able to focus rather than, this whole distracted, reactionary state. So, and then diet, so eliminating, reactive inflammatory foods, feeding the brain, ingesting anti-inflammatory nutrients, right? So things like, some of the top hits for, anti-inflammatory nutrients or, things you can eat that will actually create, like to reduce inflammation in the brain in particular, are things like fish oil, curcumin, magnesium, and other minerals. Minerals are very calming and relaxing. And those are common deficiencies, right, that lead to, an imbalanced brain, an undernourished brain. So again, I was saying detoxifying, so living a less toxic life, cleaning up the environment is huge. Some kids they react to things like, things in the chemical cleaners in their houses, or to, Glade plugins, right, in their homes, or those air fresheners in cars, or new cars, or paint, they've just painted the baby's, room and wondering why that baby's really disrupted. And then also, and also the EMF, addressing that, turning off the Wi-Fi at night, get your kids off the cell phones, turning them onto airplane, or turning them off at night if you don't need them. Getting them away from your head, at least 6 feet away. Never ever talking with a cell phone to your head. Use speakerphone if you use cell phones in your home. Like things like that. And there are lots of tips on the internet, or there are lots of different sources that you can find that are actually really useful to help you to reduce EMF exposure. One of the things I think is really, I'm really concerned about is the use of headsets. When our kids are gaming, for instance, that's a really popular habit thing to do.
Bluetooth headsets, right? Not the wired ones.
Bluetooth headsets. Yeah, wireless. Yeah, Bluetooth. Sorry, yes, Bluetooth headsets. TVs even that are enabled with Wi-Fi, things like that just kind of seem like you don't really know they're running in the background. And so that's really important to pay attention to that. People are going around with these what do you call those, ear pods or something? And they horrify me. They just horrify me.
Because, but they're connected, right?
Oh yeah. And I'll tell you, I've run lab work, done NeuroZoomer Plus, and I've actually run lab work, and I've seen this happening with kiddos that have an addiction to gaming. And they are actually developing autoantibodies. So that means antibodies to their brain tissue, which means their body is attacking their own tissue in their brain. So they're kind of like precursors to, disease that happens down the road. Or sometimes, kids have pandas and such, and it's being perpetuated by this kind of like placating with these devices. But also later down the road, you can see things coming down the pike like MS. So, this is very serious. And I don't want to all the parents to come away being really scared. I want them to be actually empowered and say, holy Hannah, I had no idea. And now I do. And let's find out more. So there's a lot to find out. So don't just think you're going to listen to this and then you're lost. There's a lot of support out there. And I'm one of those supports too, if anybody wants to contact me.
Yes.
And one last thing though, Bob, is
Yes.
that I didn't mention relationships. Okay. Because we can have an inflammatory relationship with our children, especially when they're struggling.
Right.
And so they've got, issues like ADHD or autism or neurosensory processing, disorders, things like that. And it can be really hard. I'll tell you that I know from experience. And so so when we are in a reactive state as well as our kids, those kids don't really have a choice but to mirror us sometimes. So we can have, so if we don't understand the root causes, then we can think it's like a choice, this child is like just misbehaving, or even if we know they can't really help it, it's still really frustrating. But to really understand, I learned a lot from Dr. Sandy Gluckman about this, and she really guides a lot of families very well through this learning and understanding of an inflamed brain, an inflamed body, an inflamed, like a really hyper responsive limbic system, and a very high stress situation, because all of these body assaults cause stress, and as well as all the things out in life, right? They're getting heck from teachers, and they've got all these things to do, and they've got a really busy life, and it's overscheduled, and then they check out with this Wi-Fi, and it just makes it worse. So, or we're not paying attention to what we eat, so we're going to go through the drive-through because we're all so stressed. Right. And so really at the root of that is the stress. So, I just want people to have that on their radar, is getting to the root of these problems and understanding that a lot of times our kids don't have a choice, but if we get to the root of it, then they actually won't be exhibiting the symptoms, and actually the desire to behave in that way, it doesn't have to be squished, it just doesn't exist. So I just want parents to keep that on their radar as well.
That's awesome. Well, this has been a wealth of information. Again, I encourage you guys, if you're watching this, to go back and listen to it again, maybe make some notes this time, and really kind of check off where your lifestyle may be an inflammatory lifestyle that is causing inflammation, and you might see some of the symptoms of ADD or ADHD, autism, whatever, start to resolve itself. The other thing is, Carla, what's your website that people can go to find more information about what we just talked about?
Sure, it's healthyfamilyformula.com. Healthyfamilyformula.com.
Healthyfamilyformula.com. Also,
That's
Carla's
right.
got a new book coming out called The Family Health Revolution, the definitive guide to elevating your family's health. And in there, do you talk about all the things that we just talked about?
I sure do, and way more. Can you tell I'm a little bit prolific and I can't stop talking or writing? So
I can tell you.
It's a monster. It'll be in there.
Awesome. So make sure you pick up that book, The Family Health Revolution. When does that come out, Carla?
It comes out in hopefully we're looking at April.
Awesome. So keep your eyes open for that. You'll see the links below on Carla's website, as well as ways to contact Carla. If you have any information or any questions about what Carla talked about today, you can reach out and make sure that you get her free gift, which is she's basically giving you a sample of her upcoming book. So you'll be able to read the first few chapters, get a head start before it comes in. So Carla, thank you for being on this program. Awesome information. We love that. And we thank you for being a part of this Toolbox.
Thank you for having me, Bob.
Awesome. And thank you all for watching this edition of the ADHD Toolbox. We'll see you on the next episode.